my theory about time travel and the whole entire paradox of wiping out, let's say, the Nazi Party before they ever existed. Let's say you were able to do was go back in time multiple times to, let's say, to the point of each of the individual members that would start up the core group of what is the Nazi Party, including Adolf and Eichmann and Himmler and and the rest of the nutbags. Just fucking wipe them out of existence before they were born. Like you can kill off their parents before they ever uh, consummated their marriage, or just when they did have the child, boom, kill the motherfucker, wipe out the family line or whatever. Let's say you did this and you were able to do was stop any other nutbags from, let's say, starting World War II. Let's say World War One still existed, but yet World War Two, you want it stopped. That never ever happened. Here's the problem with that. Most of us in the world would not exist, including probably myself, and maybe even your own parents and grandparents, depending on your age groups, might not ever exist. Why? Well, there was a huge boom within the population of most of the world because it was a world war. So populations expanded exponentially in areas like before the actual action of what was declared as the major part of the war, or during the center, or like in the US case, we had was multiple booms during this period. One was during when a war was happening, plus towards the end of the 40s. Reason why? A lot of our troops started coming back from Europe and also from Asia and also the Pacific and other places. They were coming back home finally because we had to do after the war, which in 45, and we had to stabilize the area and make sure that no more nutbags in these areas were going to fuck over everything and try to, you know, start another fucking war. They came back home, had kids, and voila. Like my parents, in fact, kind of the same thing. But uh, here's another thing. All of our technology, all of our advancements in society would not even happen if it wasn't for World War II. You're saying, how could this be? Uh, First of all, our freeway system, highways, byways, whatever you want to call them, or if you're in Deutschland, then it's the Autobahn. You're probably going to say, well, the Autobahn was actually the first. Well, yes, it was, in fact. The Autobahn was the first ever constructed of these megalithic structures for mass transit systems. Well, roadways, actually, in fact. Unfortunately, when they built them, nobody had cars in Germany because uh, nobody could afford one, and plus fuel was cut off from the public. And whatever people had, old vehicles, and usually they were Fords and whatever, they survived. They had it running on wood gas. War, man. Gotta deal with it. Alright. But here's the thing. These structures would not be built if it wasn't for war. They were built because of one reason. They needed to do was a mass movement of military vehicles and troops. So to do so, these roadways were used. And yet, when Germany built them, no one was allowed to use them. Yes, there was a few people that were allowed to, but they were part of the government. And yeah, they were given special permission, such as the first race car to actually drive on it, which happens to be Porsche. He built his first Porsche and raced it on there. Science. No, it's not really science, but either way. Here's the thing. America actually had was way back when, during multiple times we had was the World's Fairs, showing of the cities of the future and stuff like that, and highways and systems like this. But nobody wanted them actually built. It was like a nice dream, but the problem is the cost. What would be the purpose to do so? I can understand most of them say, well, there would probably be a few, but it would be on, let's say, the East Coast, because most of the Americans at the time lived on the East Coast. Not really. And then you go westwards away from that, everybody's more spread out, and then you get onto the other coastline, which again we are congregate over there. And the same thing if you go southwards along basically along the coastlines. Yeah. Still, they weren't planning to do this. We only built these in case of emergencies. Originally, the highway system was actually designed by the federal government to be used not for transport of the citizens on a daily basis, but for emergency purposes to evacuate a city. And the first use of it was to evacuate it, Washington, D.C., and it was actually successful. People all evacuated, went calmly, and left. And this was actually a practice in case of, well, nuclear war or invasion. So everybody was orderly, and it actually worked. And plus, the system was also designed originally for only is not just government facility, vehicles like police and whatever, but it's also emergency vehicles on hospital vehicles, such as ambulances and stuff like that. And you'll have paramedic units, fire trucks, plus military vehicles, such as, not just trucks and jeeps, but tanks, missile launchers, things like that, giant vehicles with giant rockets and missiles on them. That's what it was actually meant for, not for the public to use originally. But after the slowdown of the instigation of the war afterwards, then it developed up to, where everybody's using it. Well, at least in America. Then it became popular throughout the world to build these things. But if it wasn't for World War II to happen, then it wouldn't have existed. Now, you're saying, well, that's just the freeways. I can live without it. What about your cell phone technology? Like, what do you mean? That was invented, well, in the 90s. Not really. You go back. Yes, we had cell phones back in the 70s. Yeah. But here it goes. Most of our advanced technologies in microcircuitry that develops of our systems wasn't actually starting in development really until World War II. The advancements of, let's say, the jet engine, that was, yeah, I know, it was actually in the turn of the century when the jet engine system that was actually invented, that was an actual working engine that could be used for planes. But nobody saw any use for it, and plus the military looked at it like they don't trust that because they don't know the technology. That's what usually happens. Anytime a new technology comes into play, the military is usually always standoffish on it. And the government's like, no, we don't trust it completely. Not until there's a war, then it goes, hell, let's fucking use this damn shit, see if it actually works. If we see a viable use, yeah, we'll just continue using it. If not, fuck it. And we'll just ignore it and deny that it ever happened in the first place. But I'm still going on with this cell phone technology, plus all of our massive computers. All right, computer advancements actually accelerated during the 1940s, especially in America. We built massive computing systems, not just people, calculating things, but actually machines doing this. And our first use of it was like giant buildings, and some of them were the sizes of normal suburban garages, like my own garage when I was a kid. About that size was a complete supercomputer where you could literally walk in and you had to debug it, literally cleaning out the bugs, physical bugs, insects, moths and stuff. Because that's how it was. You had was circuitry plus you had these bulbs, which are vacuum tubes, and they glow. By the way, they go, yeah, they actually lit up. So yeah, and it gets really fucking hot. You still have to clean it out and make sure there's no dust that gets attracted to the electromagnetic uh, of properties of that facility because it produced so much electromagnetism that cling on dust particles. That's if you ever wondered why you open up your case and you realize, hey, my motherboard is covered in dust. How the fuck does this happen? Why is there so much dust on my thing, my fans? Well, it's because electromagnetic effects. That's it. And because electricity creates magnetism, and yet even though it's on a smaller scale, it's yeah. And actually, one of my devices has a really powerful magnet in it that picks up other metal objects and sticks to it, even when it's turned off. But yeah, digressing on that. Well, like I said, cell phone technology, I know that it didn't really get off the ground and sped up further, not until the 90s, really. But yet we had it back in the 70s. And yes, we had was, earlier systems back in the 50s, car phones and stuff like this. Plus, it goes back to the 40s, by the way. And you say, what? How can that be? Well, what do you think a walkie-talkie is? If you looked at Hogan's Heroes or any of the other World War II programs, you'll notice that a walkie-talkie was nothing more than a giant telephone with a huge battery pack plus an antenna array system because they're out in the middle of nowhere. You had to do this. But the advancements of technologies from that period accelerated further. We have like jet propulsion, we have rocket propulsion vehicles and weaponries. We have the concept of particle weapons that were being developed, but not actually being made really. It was in theory by all sides, believe it or not. Then you had was sonic weapons that were actually produced in Germany. You had was other forms of propulsion, which was called a cyclonic engine, as it were. It's basically a device that you put on on the front of your propellered engine as it's going like it's a cap. And what it did was siphon the air going through and creating a vortex, and it's also known as a vortex engine, and it just opens up, a vortex, so basically like a vacuum tube system, and you get sucked through. So it speeded up because tests actually showed of this, it did work. And then when it was just by itself, it floated around and moved around. Yeah, a lot of people don't even know that it exists or actually thought it's bullshit. There's actually a museum on this. And the descendant, I think it's the son that still exists to this day, the son of the creator, because the creator, he died. But his son was able to get everything, and what he was able to do was get the old photos and also the films that his dad did and build a museum. I don't know. This is interesting. If you're in Europe and you actually know of this museum, go to it. Actually look at it. It's quite interesting within the black projects that the Nazis end up doing. They stole this man's tech, as it were, declared it part of their projects, and tried to accelerate it on it to probably make multiple devices like other rocket scientists, believe it or not. They really wanted to do was leave this planet, build bases on the moon and Mars and Phobos and Phobos. These are Nazi rocket scientists, by the way. They only are Nazis because the party says if you join the party, you live and you get to do your sciencey things. If not, we're gonna fucking kill you. That's how it was then. So they say, see Kyle then. Whatever. It's kind of stupid. But that's how it was. And rocket science would not exist the way it did and accelerate if it wasn't for the war. Because war pushes countries to the limits, especially at that one. Anyone where it becomes that severe where all sides are determined to win, to stop the other from taking over the whole entire planet. That's what's going to happen. The acceleration of weaponry and also advanced technologies, such as the computer accelerated, plus you have is sonar, radar. For a long time, radar was actually declared a secret device that, if you were trained to use it, you were only trained on one part of it. So in case if you got captured, you didn't know how to fucking build the damn thing or actually really run it. Like most of the people that, if you ever did catch them, it would be the ones that actually knew of what it looks like, what they're looking at, but couldn't really tell you how the damn thing actually runs because they don't know. They just know how to read the instruments. What thing they were told very limited on purpose because of the British government had control of radar, and the U.S. government mainly had control of the sonar. So fuck you, Britain. We already did was reverse engineered, figured it out on our own, and voila, fuck you. I like British. I like the British to a certain degree. Same thing with America. My own family problems about those countries. Well, anyways, okay, with the advancement of technology that we have, cars would not get faster and faster if it wasn't for the war. Because think of all of our fastest vehicles, the luxury race cars that we have that anybody can buy, but they're fucking expensive. You had it start with Porsche. You're going to say, what about Lamborghini? Where does he fit in this? Simple. Lamborghini, his family, actually had was, you know, they built vehicles. And Mr. Lamborghini himself, the one that actually started with the race cars, he was very much into vehicles and the Porsche. Yes, his company actually worked on tractors. Believe it or not, yeah, Lamborghini actually made tractors. Think of John Deere all of a sudden decided to do was build the most awesome race car and name it after bulls and race car drivers. That's what Lamborghini did. He loved cars. He saw the Porsche. He actually decided to do was make his own Porsche. He made it better, more efficient, and showed it to Porsche. Also tried to explain to Porsche, and Porsche found out, Lamborghini. What the Lamborghini company was, they're just build tractors and and trucks and stuff. So like, fuck you. Why should I ever listen to you? You build utility vehicles. I build superior race cars, efficient, road machines, that travel faster than your damn hunk of junk will ever go. But yeah, plus Lamborghini, besides him being a gearhead, as it were, major gearhead, by the way, he wasn't like, hey, I'm rich, my company does this, but I know shit. He actually knows how to build this fucking shit, and he built it himself and stuff, a lot of vehicles. During the war, if you didn't know, Lamborghini is Italiano. Yeah, the Italians joined with Germany is because the fascists took over with the help of the Nazi Party, and the Nazi regime with their military control took over Italy. When that happened, Lamborghini was actually part of the army, the Italian army. No, he wasn't a coward. He was actually part of the motor pool. Because since his company actually builds vehicles, it makes more efficient sense for him to be in the motor pool to be a mechanic in the motor pool to fix vehicles. And that's what he did. He fixed trucks and tanks and whatever vehicles, and when it, you have half tracks and stuff like that from Germany, he fixed those. He made them more efficient, actually. Believe it or not, he increased the efficiency of every vehicle that came into his assigned facility that he was at. He got his crew units to work the way he wanted, and these were all trained professionals, and he trained them even better than anyone could imagine. Yes, if it wasn't for the war, we would not have the Porsche. We would not have luxury race cars. Definitely not have the glorious Lamborghini vehicles that we have today, especially the Diablo. Because most likely, Lamborghini would probably still be making trucks and tractors, would be a rival to John Deere. John Deere would have control of the U.S. market, or the Americas technically, while Lamborghini would probably, by this time, if they continued on, maybe had a complete stranglehold of uh, the peninsula. Well, not technically just the peninsula of Italy, but I should say is actually most of Europe, or maybe all of Europe, because it was actually cheaper to manufacture within Europe and then ship them pretty close to have America build them and then ship it across, because most of John Deere's were actually built in America originally, way back when. Now you can probably have factories everywhere, but yeah. But if it wasn't for the war, things like that wouldn't happen. We wouldn't have as supersonic engines. Of course not. You're thinking, how's that happen? The first supersonic jet engine that was part of, an airline system, airlines, that didn't exist like what? Like the 60s, 70s, around there when they started building these? Yes, that is true. And our first projects of these did actually go faster than actually the French version of it, which was. Um, no, I'm getting a mind blank, whatever. I forgot what it was. But anyways, we had was a supersonic engine back in the 60s. We tried building them in the 60s and then tried again in the 70s. The problem is the market wasn't ready for that. Yes, it does work, but the problem is, laws of how fast it can go over cities and, the sound, because every time it goes at its full speed past this, it always breaks the sound barrier. It goes past Mach 1, it creates a sonic boom. Does that. I've known this because I'm interested in plays. Hell, the SR-71 Blackbird flew over my house many, many times, even though during that time it was still declared top secret, flying like this. I even looked up and had a little toy and go, oh shit, there it is. And from the right distance, it was about the same size, but mine was like about this big. But it was like way up there. But still, we won't even have technology like that, because after the war, yes, a lot of our technologies started advancing really quickly during the wars, during especially World War II, with jet engines, rocketries, and plus there were weapons. Nuclear arms were being built severely. Without nuclear, most of America would not exist the way it does. You're going to say, how come? Simple. You probably don't realize that the majority of your power, especially if you're on the East Coast, you're powered by nuclear power plants. New York City is actually 3 or 4 nuclear power plants that run that city. Literally. It's like fucking power plants that are running off city. Not just one, several of them. Yeah, it gets really ridiculous. Because after the war, the advancement of nuclear arms, plus the advancements of nuclear technologies, we also discovered of other uses that we can create power plants. Without the war, nobody would have thought or invest in such things, because a lot of these things, like power plants, if you didn't know, are also top secret projects by the military and the federal governments to do is studies and advancements, scientific advancements within nuclear physics, and also the containment of nuclear equipment and arms and whatever, the plutonium rods and uranium U-232, Plus, you always need cadmium. It stops the radioactivity, or it goes boom. You get another Chernobyl. Bad, bad. Well, the continuing of our technologies, it wouldn't advance. Our arms race that we had would not exist. Plus the advancements of our technologies, our vehicles, we wouldn't even have the Jeep. And without that, might not even have is the Hummer, because the Hummer really replaced was the Jeep. And then we have other vehicles that replace the Hummer. Oh, but still. And then you're going to say, well, what about television? Didn't television actually exist before World War II? Yes. But since the war created was an economic boom and forced a lot of countries out of the Great Depression, then there was a need for luxury items, for leisure. So that's when you start having building of more theme parks, especially in America. People in America started relaxing after the war, having more and more kids. And then you have the 50s, we have is a lot of theme parks being popped up left and right throughout America, if you didn't know. You're going to say, what about Disneyland? Yes, Disneyland was created within the mid to late 50s when it ended up opening. Yeah, it was like 56, I believe, is when it opened. But yeah, still, if it wasn't for the war that created was an economic boom, then the creation of companies society will go through these other devices, create other things because, well, there's actually a need. Also, housing went skyrocketed. People start living outside of cities into suburban areas. Now we're, the suburbs, in actual houses because people end up with more and more money. Plus, you had the GI Bill, and that made that possible. Plus, you had was guys that went to war with very little information, but learned a lot more coming back, such as human skills. Plus, we got people that were part of the film crews and learned how to actually use the equipment. Plus, if it wasn't for the war, we wouldn't have had the more advanced film technologies from Nazi Germany. We literally went into their facilities and took the damn shit and sent it back, and we sent it to MGM plus films to Kodak and a few other companies in America, and they fucking looked at it, and we had blueprints. We actually sold fucking blueprints to make a lot of these shit, and we just say, fuck it, we'll just make it. Germany made actually a really good camera and more advanced film where it lasts longer, and audio tape that was very more efficient, where it lasts longer, it was more durable and higher sound quality, like the recording systems, higher quality sound. Same thing with the speakers, the radios, and plus Germany also had was microphones that were really the top quality of mics for that time, and the advancement furthered throughout the music industry. If you really think about it, if it wasn't for the war, none of that would have been possible. Nobody would probably have built any of this shit. Might have taken a long time, but of how fast we went, it wouldn't have happened the way it did. And then the advancements of technology increased. Okay, the war has ended. You think, well, when technology slowed down? Not necessarily. We had was a Cold War. We were still at odds with communist nations that we already knew they were, the enemy. Yes, during the war we slept with the enemy, as it were, but it was more like the enemy of my enemy is my friend. That was a very common ideology that we have in the military. I'm not in the military, but that's how it is with the higher ranks. That's what you want. You rather have your enemies fight each other so you don't have to waste your precious goods or yourself or your peoples, your resources into this conflict. Use your enemies against each other. And then divide and conquer. The whole system. Your enemies fight each other, they weaken each other to non-existent. Whoever is the victor, we fuck over the other one. Bye bye, motherfucker. Now, Russia still had was a huge population plus a large landmass. Plus, they took over a lot of areas after the war. You know, even during the war and continue. Plus, they were in leagues with everybody, even with Nazi Germany. They had was a peace agreement of, well, actually, it wasn't really a peace treaty. It was more of a non-combatant treaty, or what is it? They will basically ignore each other in the war. They will not engage into conflict. That's what it was. They agreed upon this while their fingers were crossed behind their backs. Having Hitler and Stalin, shaking hands, smiling at each other, but with their fingers crossed behind their backs and thinking, "You're such a fucking dumbass. I'm gonna kill you." It was kind of like that. But yeah, because both sides attacked Poland. You probably only know that Germany had invaded Poland, but you didn't realize that on the other side of Poland, Russia invaded. That's right. Russia invaded Poland along with Nazi Germany, and they agreed to split it in half. But Germany decided to be sly about this and to point the fingers at Poland by staging bullshit radio programs, and also fake invasion plans by having their own troops dressed as Polish military to invade parts of Germany on the coast, or Prussia technically, to invade radio stations, whatever, and specifying there is a Polish, invasion plan, and saying that Germany is being invaded by Poland. It was their excuse to invade. They did it on purpose. That's if you didn't know. That's how Germany did that. But they used the whole radio scheme to do is convince the world that it's Poland's fault. Poland attacked. We're just defending ourselves. They boosted up the radio signal so other countries can hear these messages that are broadcasted out. Plus, they also had a lot of fireworks and shooting, pretty much in the air than anything else, of conflict. Well, Russia went in and just bulldozed through on the other side. And Poland was stuck in a two-front war. But they lost to Germany. Germany, took over, and then Poland was also divided and then reassembled and then taken over by Russia. By Russia. Yeah. The triple SR. Alright. So, a lot of these other things, like I said, of technologies wouldn't exist. Well, like I said, after the war, you had was the Cold War. We're in a Cold War against communist countries, especially Russia. Technically, then you have is their offshoot cousins, which controlled was other areas, which were their own variation of communism, which was against the true nature of the real communist ideals that started in the 1800s. So it's like, like Marxist. Yeah, that type of communism never really existed in any form of any government. Trust me, it didn't. Sorry. It was communism that was the disguise of what it really was, a fascist dictator that was um, self-centered, egotistical, and also some of them were actually hypochondriacs, but most of them were paranoid, delusional gun nuts. Yes, they were trigger happy and they're fucking insane in the membrane. Not a good idea though, but eh. So With this Cold War existing, the advancements of weapons continued going on, and plus the use of nuclear arms, and plus since the war ended, we still, like I said, the leisure part in using these technologies in other sectors, into the private sector to to help the rest of society, because without trying to contain the atom to blow the shit out of your enemy, we end up using that technology that we understand how to contain it to, well, use it to boil fucking water. That's actually how nuclear power plants are. Instead of burning coal to heat up water to turn the steam to turn the turbines, you just throw in nuclear rods into water basically and boil the fuck out of it. Actually, it's a little more different. We actually, what it really does is there is tubes filled with water that is super pressurized, is contained. It has to, because the expansion rate would blow up if you did it. You know, have these thick, massive pipes to control it. And you did was the nuclear radiation basically heated the water to an absurd level. Basically, it was it was beyond the boiling point. All right, it was superheated water, but it was pressurized, so it can't technically boil. And plus, since there's no space within the pipe, they kept it pressurized. It was just solid water going straight through. And plus, this water, as in the pipes, it goes into a cooling vat of fresh water that gets replaced, because that vat is the vat that excuse me, the water from those vats turn into steam because of the superheated water boils the shit out of that water. And literally beyond boiling, it goes into vaporization and turns into steam, turns the fucking turbines. And if you want to know those big, weird, cone shaped things, that's actually to filter a way of dragging all of that steam outwards. And you saying, oh, it has these white, blows out smoke. No, those are actually, you can think of it as clouds, technically speaking. Because what is a cloud? It's nothing more than water droplets that got together and formed that. It's water vapor. That's it. And it goes drifting and forming new clouds. That's in case if you never knew what those white things, those big structures were like at Homer's nuclear, the nuclear power plant that Homer works at. If you ever want to know, those are actually the cooling towers where the steam goes out. But the superheated water stays within a sealed containment and sealed system. So yeah, because it's radioactive, you don't want that into the water system to the to the public water. No, most likely you're not going to get is a blinky, three-eyed fish. But in case you ever wonder, yeah, radiation and other toxins have created um, weird creatures, or actually malfunctions and genetic anomalies within the animal kingdom, within fish, also within amphibians such as frogs with multiple limbs, like their back legs with each have a secondary foot attached at their ankle. So it's like 2 feet right there. It's like on each thing. Or they have 4 legs plus 2 arms, or no arms, or they're missing limbs. Like they were born and they turn into a frog, but no limbs. No arms were developed, no legs. Weird. But that actually had happened. Also, two-headed frogs, snakes. But that has always happened, even though, without nuclearization, but yeah, or toxins. There's genetic anomalies, but radiation causes these anomalies to exist further by fucking with the genetic code. Plus, more studies within our solar system, plus we was the space race, which was more of an arm race if you never knew this. We were trying to send up shit faster and faster into space and keep it up there longer. If you wondered why Kennedy was so into us getting to the moon and throughout space, he really didn't give a fuck about space travel. He didn't give a flying fuck about it. All he cared about was outdoing Russia. That's all he cared about. That we have to be number one. That's the only thing. He before he had was that speech. He actually written it, and before he actually went on the air and stuff, went into the press conference, before this, he asked, "Can we get to the moon? Is that possible that we can get into space?" Because at the time, Russia already sent was a satellite in space blinking, and there was a fucking dog in there. They also sent one with two dogs, one and no dogs. They also put people in there. Yeah, whatever. Later on, or maybe not. Who knows? Because Russia's not really telling the truth on their whole entire space program past of all of their great and valued people that died in the attempts to get to space by being blown up, or they died on re-entry, or they got literally lost in space, like whoop, never return. Depending on which story you want to listen to, but some of it is actually very much true because Russia actually said, yeah, it did actually happen. But we're not going to talk about it. That's Russia, though. But anyways, space program wouldn't exist. We wouldn't even have satellites. Without satellites, we wouldn't have modern communications like the cell phone again. Because cell phone technology also needs satellites for it to communicate. Same thing with your television, your internet. Watching me on YouTube. It wouldn't be possible without satellites, or also without the advancement of the technology of communication systems. And if you ever wondered, like, oh, didn't Graham Bell and a few other people came up with ideas for a telephone system that already existed? They created it and happened? Yes, but yeah, don't understand that Graham Bell also invented was a fiber optic wiring system. Yes, fiber optics. The reason why he didn't do this in his time, he knew that the cost of making it was way too great. It was too expensive to make glass rods, or the filaments, the tubes. They were too expensive to make at that time. Yes, they could make them. He's actually done this, but the problem is it was way too costly to do this and not viable to construct the system in fiber optics, so it would be light pulses that, how it was. He patented it, by the way, but still, it existed in the late 1800s to now, but we only got using it is because, well, we technology advanced and plus manufacturing increased and became cheaper and cheaper to make a lot of things, like fiber optics. The first time, the world actually got to see fiber optics, the mass public I'm talking about, is actually a simple toy that came out in the 50s and 60s and still exists to this day. You know, the it's basically a ball that has all these filaments and it changes color and stuff because it rotates through a color wheel and the light actually goes through the tubes. It's a type of novelty device. It's a lamp. Yeah, but that was the first introduction to the the masses of the 20th century to know of this technology. And then, oh yeah, we also had was microwaves. Yes, microwaves do normally exist, but the microwave oven would not exist if it wasn't for engineers, that realized a certain device on airplanes that was creating microwaves, but they didn't realize that at the time. But they just know that it's cold to the touch, and yet it's melting their fucking chocolate bar. They also did experiments and cooked on this, where it was producing it. This is actually part of the radio equipment that actually produced microwaves, and people didn't realize the crew of the ship were very close to it. It's unshielded and might have had some problems.
like down there, and also here in the radiation. It's like, oh, at least it wasn't completely long term. Eh, eh. Well, anyways, if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't have microwave ovens. You didn't probably know that microwave ovens didn't really exist until after the war, where, if you didn't know, it was actually the high restaurant, really expensive restaurants had microwave ovens. And yeah, some people that were wealthy enough actually bought them for their own houses. And then it became cheaper and cheaper over the decades. And of course, in the 70s, and then mostly in the 80s, because it was like the future is now type thing. And it became very cheap, and pretty much everyone was into, the fandangled device, and it was much smaller. You can fucking cook a turkey. Like mine, the first one I had well, actually, it literally cooked a turkey. You can throw in a fucking full bird and plugs, hook it up, and boom, it fucking cooks the turkey inside and out in a temperature gauge. And actually, yeah, that wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the war. For advancements in technology and communications, and also radar, sonar, and and also radio jammers, and all these other technologies that started within the war and accelerated afterwards. And in the Cold War, a lot of the technologies further developed in the private sectors, plus also within the military sector. And then we had supersonic jets, military. We still use them in the military, but the public, it became, well, it's just too expensive, and to keep on flying these things for long terms. And oh, I almost had the name of the French version of the American project of it. But either way, when I do get involved, remembering it, I will put it in the doobly doo. Yeah, so it'll be there. So okay, yeah, advancements of technology accelerate, and believe it or not, the kid that figured out to fold up, the wiring to create a better signal. Yes, he figured this out in the 90s. Dude, I knew this since I was a little kid in the 70s. I mean, really a child. It's like, that bending a wire will create, like for your television or radio, increases its clarity, plus it's also its strength of, like if you want the receiver, send it out. And also, like receiver is to receive information, or a transmitter to send out, to increase its bandwidth, and also its distance, that you can actually gain or send. Like if TV, I did that to receive uh, television frequencies, television stations from further away. Like I live in La Mirada, which is actually a suburb of Los Angeles, because LA is actually the main city, and all the other cities outwards is technically the suburbs of LA. But mine was actually declared a city because we have rights at being of a city on our own. Yeah, just like whatever, part of LA County. But still, if you didn't bend up your wire or anything, fucked with it, or fucked with your TV, you would never get San Diego or most of the other stations that were out further. I did, because I fucked with it. I got Channel 3 from San Diego. Yay! Normally we don't get that, but I did. Because that's what I do. I fuck with things, get it to work. So, yeah, he figured this out because he was a ham radio operator. But I already knew this, and it wouldn't have been for the investment of television to exist for any of the masses to even know of such things. So it's like, maybe he might have not even known until, unless television existed. But he was a ham radio operator, and he just wanted to increase the strength of his radio. And that's what he did, and ended up being for cell phones. Because, yeah. So I already knew about this, and it's like when I found out, it's like, Finally, someone figured this out. Was it just me that figured this out, or is just my family is that fucking smart that we already knew this? But that's not true because a lot of families done this. Bend up fucking the wire to increase, put like a coat hanger and fucking bend it even further and getting a better resolution, a better signal incoming onto the television. Yeah, so yeah, uh, yeah. And plus, the internet wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the war and also the Cold War that happened after. But still, it goes back to the war. The advancements of technology and just accelerated because of the war. Yeah, some of the very basic parts of what we have today, especially in my life growing up in the 70s and 80s, it was technology from World War II, and yet a little more advanced. And some things that the Germans had was still more advanced than shit that existed at that time. It's like, for God's sakes, why didn't we have fucking flying wings already? How? Germany built shitloads of these, and there were several companies that built them. All and my favorite one is actually from Goethe. Goethe, for God's sakes, they fucking made an awesome, flying wing, which is the Fledermaus. That. Then you had was the Comet, which is basically a V1 rocket with a person inside, laying down like. Argh! But the problem with that is the test pilot, he died. How? He noticed that nobody knew that rocket fuel, if it gets on you, it burns the fucking shit out of you. It fucking kills you. Yeah, the rocket fuel that they used at that time. Um, it did was melt the person, turn them into fucking goo within the tube. That's what happened because when he landed, he doesn't have a landing gear. Because if you didn't know, the Comet was a U2, was a V2 rocket. The V1 is the one that went okay. V2 was all right. Still blowing up. Yeah, it's a person cockpit, put wings, more elevators, and also a rudder, so it can fly and you can steer it and move it. Here's the thing: the test pilot on these planes, or rocket planes, as you want to call them, the Comet, had was a crate that it was on. That was its landing gear. When it takes off, flies off, the landing gear stays on Earth. Well, he flew around, then he was trying to land. He landed. I don't know how the fuck he did this, but I've seen some of the footages that survived from the war that came out and ended up on PBS and shit. He fucking landed on that damn crate. But the problem is, when he landed a little too hard, which caused a rupture with inside, and the fuel leaked into the cabin. By the time they got to him, he was fucking goo. He was burning up, and they just had, because he was bolted in, they had to unbolt him. It took a while, but still, he was dead. And that's when they realized, you know what? Before going into combat, you do is fly the damn thing, fly around till no fuel, then you fucking glide. Like before you actually go into physical combat, like you just launch it toward, to go towards your enemy. You just fly around, make sure you don't get hit because you want it to last long, so the fucker can shoot. you know, because he had gauges, triggers on here. That's it. But yeah, because they know that one hit, boom, the motherfucker blows up. Not very good, but it worked. Yeah, they had regulations now. like, this guy died. Oh, oops. This is what happens to you. Okay. So let's make sure that don't happen. Make sure, like, when you're gonna land, you fly around until you have no fuel and then land. Yeah. Even if you're gonna make a hard landing make it on grass, because even if you try it on the landing strip, it's gonna cause sparks and rupture the fuel. You can die or even blow up as well. But either way, the pilot would be dead. and fuel. Well, anyways, that is what happens. Anyway, like I said, our technology, the way we live, even us, apparently, would not exist if it wasn't for the war. If we went back in time to wipe out people, especially the Nazi Party and other wackos that wanted to take over the world, if we wiped them out, stop that from ever happening, your life as you know it would never have happened. If you went back and did this and you came back within the same time, because anything you happened to change in the past, you create a new timeline. So you don't actually go back to the point where you left. You go in the exact same time, but different parallel reality that you just now created. And that's what happens. You realize the world is more likely to be like the 50s. Like, this is what I suspect. If the war did not happen, the whole situation, it would probably stay like about the 20s, would have a huge depression. The population would crash further and further, you know. Plus, when you have is a populace that's depressed or in war, or there would probably be high population explosions that would happen. But without a world war like how it was, the population of the world wouldn't increase like how it is now. Plus, you wouldn't have the technology, or the economies wouldn't have gone up the way it did. Like Europe would have been in a struggle. Yes, after the war, Europe was in a financial struggle and was in tatters, while other countries flourished. While Europe was nope, nope, nope. Especially England, they didn't get off rations until the 70s. War rations from World War II, believe it or not. They've been on rations all the way up until the 70s. It's like, how's that possible? Well, if you ever watch Doctor Who, remember of the 10th Doctor when he has Rose Tyler, and Rose meets one of his oldest companions that he's been kind of spying on for multiple lifetimes. With which I'm sorry, she is dead, and I forgot her damn name. And she's been with, I think she's actually been with the most doctors than any of them, if you count all of her interactions with every different form of doctor that she's been in act with. Um, Sarah Jane Smith. Oh, Sarah Jane Smith. Yes, Sarah Jane Smith. Because Rose pointed out that you were still on, when you're my age, you were still on the rations. In other words, from the 70s. Because remember, she was with the doctor. Well, she was with, well, okay, she was with like two doctors. We definitely know of two doctors she was with in the TV series. But there was actually more. You had was the third doctor. I should probably go. Well, anyways, I'll do my Doctor Who thing later. But yeah, so she was like in the 70s, 60s, 70s is when she ran. It's still that. And plus, England didn't get color television until the late 60s, really. And they were struggling. Same thing with the rest of Europe, was still trying to rebuild their world. Well, anyways, uh, whatever you do, always be awesome and never give up, never surrender, never give in, never quit. Okay, till next time.